back, everyone, to another CRECo.ai Real Estate Roundtable. Technology, marketing, capital, construction, cybersecurity, all things above land, i.e. real estate, with my friends, colleagues, and industry experts. We're back for another comprehensive view of what's happening across the industry, straight from some of the earliest adopters to some of the foremost technology users to construction and cybersecurity and marketing. So we were midway here, but I want to jump right back to that conversation. Saul, you had mentioned briefly just now a change in policy, or at least a big step back news-wise with NAR. What's the big picture? What's changing right now with the industry? Just real briefly, and then we'll go into our introductions, because I also want to know about what everybody did for their fourth, because this was our first time emerging as a community since COVID. That's going to lead us into the next part. So go ahead, Saul.
Yes, it was where the Department of Justice is always in some kind of conversation or litigation with the National Association of Realtors over MLS rule. NAR doesn't own an MLS, but it has rules, and then the local MLSs adopt them, and they get errors and omissions. So it's a kind of a complex system. But the DOJ and the FTC, the dual arms of the federal government, they've been after NAR for a long time. Continually for one thing or another. And there was a settlement in place from 2008 to 2018 over distribution of data. So it plays right into what we're talking about. So there was a settlement about how data was to be handled, how that was to work. That settlement, 10-year settlement, expired in 2018. And so immediately there were FTC, DOJ hearings, and then the DOJ filed antitrust lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors, in which case NAR's best strategy is to say, whoa, let's talk about this. And what's your points? And so they started to talk, and it looked like NAR could have satisfied the things that they were asked to satisfy in that agreement. And the DOJ said, we think we want to look at this closer, and they backed out of the settlement talks. So when that happens,
They hit pause. They backed away and said, wait.
They backed away. So I tell people, that's like taking the handcuffs off. That's like saying these settlement talks kind of kept us confined to what we can talk about. We've decided now you can tie this in. You've got a new leader of the DOJ, and you have a new leader of the FTC. And she's 32 years old, and she's a trust buster. And so there's all kinds of things that play here. But the big thing is that conversations around settling primarily this offer of compensation is being challenged. And so I used to tell people, this is important for anything, the paradigms, right? When a paradigm shifts, everyone goes back to zero. And so when you're past success, right, if you're really successful, sometimes you can't see it. So right now we're looking at a paradigm shift. If in fact the offer of compensation were to be taken away from MLS, how would it function? One of the key features of MLS is the offer of compensation. So if they took it away, I'm not saying the MLS has got great value, but one of the things they use to market the value of it is an offer of compensation. And we're looking at the DOJ, and they've been working on this for 30 years. I wrote an article about it because the history of it gives us a much bigger picture of what this is an ongoing conversation between the federal government and the real estate world.
Well, and just to tie that back to last month's episode and to the group overall, once again, transparency, right? So when you talk about compensation and the MLS multiple listing services, for those on the call who don't know, that's where agents share listings, and there's a clear outline of what compensation is being split where. And this type of regulation and oversight can easily come over into construction, can easily come over into marketing, where there's a whole section I'm excited to talk to you back on how these robots, and there's some things happening that are taking our data and changing our data. But it sounds to me like, Saul, it was a very busy month regulation-wise, which we all know it was. Before we get ahead of ourselves, Chris Abel, my good friend over at CTABC for construction, welcome back. How has your month been? What's new? And then we'll go around and we'll start this ball rolling.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me back. It's been a busy month, to say the least. There's a lot of stuff going on. I'm obviously I'm up in Connecticut, and there's been a lot of stuff going on the legislative side of things, and a lot of different talks going on in regards to a lot of different things, cannabis legalization, and just a lot of different hot topics that the contractors I'm dealing with are really, staring at, and they're really trying to figure out how they're going to be, deciphering different things. But all is well at the end of the day. 4th of July was great. Spent some time up in Kennebunkport, Maine. Got a really good perspective of people they were out and about, and they were excited, and it was great to kind of see everybody
Without masks.
Without masks. If they had masks, it's okay. People were comfortable, and it was just nice to be out and about and in different restaurants, not just going to one restaurant wondering what the protocol was going to be, or going to one place and wondering, do I have to do this or have to do that? It was great. It was great. I can't complain. All is good on my end. Like I said, thanks for having me back.
Happy to have you back. And then back as well on the 4th, we were having this show a week late just because everybody was hopefully with their families doing things. I know from Facebook you were doing things. Just remind the audience who you are and what did you do for the 4th? How did you emerge from this, from COVID, as they say?
Thank you so much, Andreas. And it's always such a pleasure to be with this group. I'm just always amazed by the wisdom and expertise that is in this room at this round table. Thank you for having me. And also, as far as the 4th went, it was so oddly a return to quasi-normalcy that was really, in some ways, unexpected. Our town actually had their local carnival, the full-fledged win giant prizes, ride all the rides, eat the junk food, the whole 9 yards. And they're one of the few communities that literally kept everything, that every single piece came back. And I was so excited to see the community rally around it. Our town is kind of small. We have about 30,000 people, and we had just great showing, great attendance at all of the events. I've talked to a couple of our trustees in town since then, one of which is a good friend, and spent the whole evening hanging out with her at the carnival. And they're very pleased and very excited on the return to community gathering. And there were, I think, Chris, like you said, a lot of people without masks, some people with masks, and it didn't matter. Nobody felt like there was you could tell there's no judgment. Everybody was there having fun, whether masked or unmasked. It wasn't a factor in the enjoyment that people were experiencing. I will say, and this is what I experienced a little bit on our vacation, and my kids are 11, 15, and 17. And we went to Universal Studios in June. And one thing that had changed the experience for them was that they had, over the past year and a half, kind of acclimated to a bit of stranger danger. Nobody wanted to sit on a ride next to somebody else that they didn't know. And I think it's because for a year and a half, they've been shying away from anybody they didn't know. It was nice to see them then 4th of July weekend, a little bit more normal of mom didn't have to sit by the stranger on the ride. It was okay that we were all in a place. And I think that that's going to be pretty common as people re-enter in their own, at their own levels, re-entering general society and general business. And I do think, again, for kids, a year out of kids' lives is a long time. So for them, I think it may be even trickier. The rest of us are oh yeah, it's back to normal. And the kids are what is this new normal? So that was an interesting observation from my, real life over the 4th of July weekend, Andreas.
I love it. And it's going to lead well into a conversation I'm looking forward to have with Saul and everyone here about urban development, walking versus driving. But first, Saul, in California, where these beautiful plants grow, because you show me them on your feeds, you're back into civilization, so to speak. How was your 4th? What's going on there? And then we'll jump back over.
Well, we had a great 4th, and we live, San Diego's a great place. I own a coin-operated car wash that I bought with my high school buddies we bought the car wash in 1979, and we had a great June, and July is off to the races. That car wash is packed. Their line is a 5-bay car wash, and it's cooking. So
Everybody's
that
on
tells
their
me
way
that
out.
people are back.
Well, that's fantastic. And I love it. And it's funny. It's not funny, but last month we were focused on the kind of cataloging our data and our lives. Like, what are we going to do? What's the playbook now? And as you just said, Becca, your kids are spot on. What do I do? How am I going to do it? And I think the same approach in construction, marketing, and development is the if not now, when? Because now people are open to change because anything's better than what was. So there's been a lot of discussion about development, redevelopment, density in development. How are we going to reuse our spaces? I'd like to touch on that a little, and then Saul, I want you to lead there because California is certainly the leading development center in that area. So what's going green? What are we doing for walking and talking?
Well, I have been spending a lot of time on this. And so every time I get into something, I find out I have to take it another level up. And then I have to take it another level up. And so again, after a lot of research and conversation, here's where I am. I think that we've outgrown our land use model. And we've been talking about it for years. We've been working around it for years. And I believe we're actually at a crisis point where we've got so many things wrong in our culture and society that the only way we're going to be, including climate change, regardless of what you think about it, right? That the only way we're going to be able to start to fix things is to bring to bear our greatest assets and to maximize with efficiency the use of our greatest assets. Real estate, 43% of our assets are real estate. And so that means we're back to under all is the land, right? The Realtor Code of Ethics, I don't know it by heart, but almost, under all is the land upon its wise utilization and widely allocated ownership depend the survival and growth of free institutions and of our civilization. Realtors should recognize that the interest of the nation and its citizens require the highest and best use of the land and the widest distribution of land ownership. They require the creation of adequate housing, the building of functioning cities, the development of productive industries and farms, and the preservation of a healthful environment, written like in 1904. And so that's what real people are into real estate, whether they know it or not, that's what they're talking about. And so how can you bring to bear the power of your greatest asset to solve the biggest problems that we have in this country? And the answer is you need to use data, and you need to use computing power, and you need to go from intuition to insight. And you can't do that without the data, without the platforms, without the computing power. But if you do, and you can bring things together, you can tell amazing stories about property, you can bring transparency, you can eliminate risk. There's all kinds of undervalued and overvalued assets. I think we're looking at the biggest change since the interstate highway system went in the 50s with the Eisenhower administration. What makes we're looking at a paradigm shift in land use. Paradigm shift, not change, fundamental change, just like the interstate highway system. Well, that would have never worked if you didn't have policy and you didn't have funding. Guess what you got today? You got policy and you got funding. And we haven't seen the last of the funding that's coming down, but those objectives of the government, which include walkability, some 60% of the population say they want walkability, right? So there's all, and it's not for everybody everywhere, but we need to marshal the forces of data, utilize it effectively. People are working on this. Too bad Olivia's not here today, right? I mean, people have been working on this subject, and I think you're going to get policy and funding, which makes it hard to stop. And so as a real estate broker, what I tell people is forget the dissent, look for the opportunity. And I happen to be involved in a revitalization of an area up here in San Diego when I first got my broker's license. And I've seen an area go from where you couldn't sell the house to where it's really the place, you know, 600,000, 700,000 in a neighborhood you wouldn't have bought in when I got my real estate license in the late 70s. And why? Because government funding came in. You had a public-private partnership where that money got spent wisely. No, it didn't happen overnight. It took 50 years, 45 years. So I think you're all in for major, major change in land use because the forces are there to make it happen.
Well, the land use and rezoning and change of use for land. I'm sitting in our family project right now, Massachusetts, 470,000 square feet, of which we gave 100 acres to green space to the town, of which there were to be walking trails. There's, believe it or not, something called Boundless Adventures where you're up 100 feet up on ropes because people want that mix. And well, there was some money too, because there was a green component, because there was this redevelopment phase that all of us in real estate are familiar with, coming into these areas, these depressed areas around train stations or in lower income impacted areas, and turning them around. There was some debate, at least in my circles, and some, I'm sure some of yours, about what's COVID going to do here? What do we do? How do we make them safer? And open air is the safest way to be in general. So as you're pointing out, Saul, if we can take some of that data that we cataloged, courtesy of our last call, and start to learn from it, and if Olivia was here, I'm sure she'd point to some very, very great modeling and visualizations on how to do this in places that are already doing it. Then we'd be there, and we'd be well on our way. There was a piece in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, it's a small piece, where they're actually using AI to move around the orchestra, the big bands, because of disbursement. When you blow in your instrument, you're dispersing things. The same is true for people walking to and from work, doing things. What about logistics and infrastructure? So I think you're spot on. That what can we do to change the way we plan our communities, which is a paradigm shift. This zoning board, 300 people have to show up and actually vote for something to happen. And I think today, for the first time in a long time, 300 people would, because they're coming out of COVID, because they're like back of kids going.
After they wash their car. After they wash their car.
Yes, of course, yes. I just came from a car wash, and I took me a while to book one, because everybody's packed. Everybody's on the move. Now, Chris, go ahead.
I actually have two examples following what Saul was talking about with land use. So Jim Freed, our friend, has interviewed a woman from the Underline in Miami, yes, where they're building just this long park system, urban park system underneath their railway. And I know that has gotten so much critical acclaim. They've got like 5-star ratings everywhere. Everyone's excited about it. And just another example, in a completely different market. So I know, like Andreas, you've talked about New York. Saul's talking about California. We've got Miami, and even here in Illinois, one of my real estate clients called me 2 days ago. He's been working for 18 years to try to revitalize a stretch of Lake Michigan in the very northern suburbs. And now suddenly it's back.
Movement.
There's suddenly movement. And he talked about now he feels like they have the policymakers in place locally and nationally to actually get this thing off the ground, that they've had renderings and video and everything prepared to turn this blighted stretch of lakefront into what it should be on Lake Michigan. Absolutely beautiful, beautiful housing, walkable streets, all of those pieces. And it's moving.
They're here in Connecticut, and Chris may touch on these. We have Shelton. It's a thriving city. Some people don't want to live in Shelton, but it's thriving because of there's development on the river. There is a huge tax base in new development, offices included. Cinto, one of our third largest owners in the state, has been building up and down Bridgeport Ave, and now a big part of his developments, at least, have always been the incorporation of some green space. You're seeing more of that. Bridgeport, they had a walking path that goes all the way from one side of the state, basically all the way up to the other, north into Monroe. Well, Chris, on the construction side, what are you hearing from your fellowship? Let's call it your fellowship, not your member.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect word for it. One other example, just to backtrack, even in that Middletown area in Connecticut, there's the stretch along the Connecticut River, and for such a long time they talked about, oh, it's nice. There's a couple nice places to go down there.
Put in a bike rack.
Yeah. Now they're changing, and they're thinking the same way. They're thinking about, really developing that whole area, which that whole downtown area of that part of the state is really nice in that town. But now they're getting towards the water, and they're saying, you know what, this is the time to do it. So we're hopefully going to see some more in the center of the state by the Connecticut River also. But one thing that I'm seeing with some of the companies that I'm working with, some of the companies that their whole business is space and creating atmosphere and all these types of things. During COVID, during the height of it, they were struggling mightily because there was everyone was working at home. No one was, offices weren't lining up, how are they going to put in their portable walls? How are they going to put in new furniture? They weren't spending, and they were struggling. And every conversation I had with two companies in particular, they didn't know what the future was holding or what it had in store for them. I got off the phone with both of them in the past couple of weeks, and they are just moving and shaking because they have a lot of clients starting to come to them with data that has been collected, and they've used certain agencies to collect certain data or information, and now they're going to them and saying, hey, this is what we have. How can we line ourselves up better? A lot of it has to do with better hiring, because they want to make sure that they are getting the cream of the crop in regards to hiring in the construction industry, within their offices, at least their PMs, their estimators, and their these places that are dedicated to just creating space in general are really being called upon to make sure that particles are moving in certain situations, that the airflow is what it needs to be, that they can actually entice some of their new hires to say, hey, listen, this is what we've done since the pandemic, and these are some of these extra reasons why you might want to consider working for us, which a year and a half ago, that just wasn't a thing. That wasn't something, when you walked into an office, it wasn't like, oh, well, how's the air in here? That it's a factor of whether I might, jump in and take a job with this company. It's still kind of strange to even think of it, that way. But I see most of the contractors they're moving and shaking. I actually have an electrical contractor that I spoke with about 2 or 3 weeks ago, that one of the things that his company specializes in are the coin-operated car washes. And he's seeing a couple of them popping up here and there. And that's his thing. He usually has a crew, if not 2 crews, that are covering and servicing just these type of operations. It's pretty amazing to see how everything's kind of shaking out. Last time we were talking a little bit about the lumber prices, and those have gone down a little bit. Things are just kind of shaking out a little bit, and most of the people that I speak to in the industry, they're pretty excited about it. The legislative stuff has them a little nervous at the local level, but as far as the infrastructure and the money that's being invested, as Saul mentioned, with the opportunity there, they're excited. And it's good to be in this space and dealing with these people and talking with these companies and these owners all the time. I mentioned before the calls to Andreas about we have this golf outing coming up on Monday, and it's going to be so different than last year, and it's going to be exciting to have these conversations right out in the open and find out what they're working on. I see a lot of really cool buildings being developed, and a lot of neat places that, quite frankly, there wasn't a lot of building going on for years in Hartford County, especially in Connecticut.
There's movement, and there's always upside opportunity, as Saul said. As brokers, you can focus on the downside. There's always downside somewhere, but I've been a big proponent of, we live in a point in time where technology can help you find the right opportunity for someone and find someone. You can find A and B, and that's what brokers do at our core. Buyer, seller. Saul, you're leaning in like you've got a
Yeah. So it's like what's old is new again. Right. Not only in the agency comp, but in everything. Right. So as people in real estate, we know that the government uses the tools that it has for social and economic engineering purposes. When the government, and we did in taxation, double declining balance depreciation, 175% declining balance over 15 years to get people to buy apartment buildings, right? So when the government wants to do something, it uses its tools, and it's either a carrot or a stick. And when it's got the funding, things happen. And so right now we're looking at social and economic engineering. Why? Because the government wants to achieve certain things. And if you look at them, some of these things make a lot of sense. So, but underlying all of this is this story around, and I'll just read the list to you. Justice. It's about infrastructure justice, public transit justice, housing justice, climate justice, changing of zoning. We talked about that. And then so you're going to have people that kind of like these ideas. You're going to have people that don't like these ideas. You're going to have people that say private property rights, you can't force me to do things. You're going to have people that say, wait a minute, it's for the betterment. So you're going to have to be able to tell the story. But as you look at this, as you look at government funding coming down into I own a car wash. And that car wash, the highest and best use of that property since we bought it in 1979 has been to be a car wash. And 4 of us own it. But now I see that property, and we own the 2 houses next to it. If the city comes, through block grant, the tools are there through block grants and other ways to push them up. What if they just changed the zoning and they said, you can build 100 units on this property?
No more car wash.
Now, could they do that? Well, I don't know, but do we need more housing? We need, right? So we need right in the objective. So as my partners and I, and we meet every quarter and we kind of talk about what are we going to do? We're going to hold it. We're getting old. And it's like, I don't want to sell it now because we know that they're encouraged. Now, imagine if you owned a lot and you could build a second unit on it. And everybody said, well, that's going to change the face of the neighborhood. It might, but I can show you examples where it did change the face over time, actually made it better. And you know what? When they tell you can build more units, people just don't tear their houses down and build new units. So there's like 30 or 40 year transition period where this happens. And when I was an active broker in San Diego, the part of town that I would sell in, I would drive around and look for 50 by 150 foot R3A lots that had an alley in the back. Because on a 50 by 150 foot R3A alley lot, you could build 8 units. And in that neighborhood, there were houses and duplexes, and a lot of them didn't have 8 units. And so those were the opportunities for our clients that wanted to build things, that wanted a cookie cutter 8 unit boxes, right? Or whatever they wanted to build. So when we see this density change, because that's what's going to happen, we're going to see increased density. Why? Walkability. Here's another thing the government wants: less driving. It's just amazing. There's so much traffic. We got to build another lane. No, there's so much traffic. Let's make it a bike lane. And it doesn't make any sense to people, but that's what happens. Why? Because there's a bigger objective here. And the bigger objective is to convince people. We started building light rail in San Diego 30 years ago. That light rail, nobody even rode it for 20 years. It didn't matter. They're laying the groundwork. And so when you do your redevelopment, revitalization, you look for the good bones, right? Where's the old train line? Where's the old trolley line? Because we're going to have to spend money on infrastructure. Our existing infrastructure is in such bad shape that if you're going to have to spend the money, you got to look. That's why I say every time I look at this, I have to take it up one notch higher. And I finally got to the point where we need to use our biggest asset to solve our greatest problems. And we need data and computing power and data scientists to do this. And guess what? We got that today. And so, and when there's new transportation, so that's going to change valuation of real estate. It's going to change valuation of loans that are secured by real estate. What about all that commercial property where it's valued at something, but they haven't taken into consideration it might be underwater in 10 years? And so there's all kinds of things right now. And I say there's great opportunity, and we just have to look for it. But it's there.
Absolutely. There's a few conversations that I've heard just recently on this line. You've got government buying up property. You've got corporate parties buying up property. And they're not in it for the short-term gains. The individual buyer is not there buying that property saying, because they're being outbid time and time again. Why? Because companies are looking at bigger picture. They've gone up 3 levels saying, hey, I'm going to buy these 3 homes.
So they finally realized, Andreas, it's gotten best come full circle. It used to be if you owned the land, you didn't sell it, you leased the land and people could build improvements on it. The land, we wouldn't sell the land. And so now the big companies, because they get negative interest on their, right, they're looking for things that have got sustainable. And so they're thinking housing. It makes all the sense in the world. But what it's doing is freezing first-time buyers out of the marketplace. And so it's gotten, that's another thing. We got to look at the data and we got to try to minimize the negative effects of rebuilding and revital. And we can't do that without the data. So again, we got to go from intuition to insight. And while we might do something to a certain part of town, who might it affect? And how can we mitigate some of the negative effects, right? And so it's a bigger picture.
Yes. I mean, mitigate. How can you prevent the corporation from coming in and buying up all the land? It's buyer and seller. And they have good data, and they're going to go after it. They're going to make moves. No matter what marketing or construction or whatever side of the table we're sitting on, there is always more data.
And another thing they do, though, the issue then is you just build more. And see, we've been restricted from building more. And I get back to the zoning piece, right? So if you can increase the densities, then it's less cost to build. You can build more. You can provide more housing. And so while the corporations can buy up all they want, if you can keep building, but why we're stuck is we're stopped, right? The NIMBY thing, not in my backyard. So people say they want these things, but then they don't really want these things. So if we can get building, and how are we going to start building again? Incentives. Right. And so if there's money to incentivize, you're going to see the change. And you're right. They're doing that. But there's an answer to that, too.
Data. There's an answer to everything through data.
And building more.
My shameless plug, CRECo, we aggregate data. But yes, there's an answer to data. Data solves everything. On top of land sits buildings and people, which I believe is our best asset. But those people can't do anything without the right data. Speaking of data, as we move through the show here, Becca, I saw an interesting article and I wanted to push it over on the marketing side because we're talking about data. What about bad data? So marketing, I buy an ad, I'm promoting, I figured out where my stuff is and I'm buying stuff. But now there are things, I guess, and I saw it briefly, that'll click and run my bill up from Google, for instance, as an example. I buy an ad from Google, and there are machines out there that are going to affect my data negatively. Let me say it that way. What is that? What's your take there?
So pay-per-click is always this kind of nebulous void to throw money in. There's a reality that we don't actually do Google Ads as a management, like we don't manage Google Ads for clients. I actually rely on an expert who's a Google partner, has a ton of certifications and things like that, because it is really complex, but also because I've thrown so much money away on Google Ads. Because when you're doing pay per click, there's no controls over it. And that actually is true on any platform. So I was talking to a client actually earlier today and giving them some advice on where to do some of their advertising. And they talked about LinkedIn. And I was like, LinkedIn's amazing, but you're setting a budget and it's not being seen after that budget gets spent. So if that budget isn't big enough, then your ad isn't being seen by enough people for it to be super impactful. For Facebook advertising, they've been running an ad on Facebook. I suggested that they should modify that advertising mechanism to instead be a lead gen ad where they can request contact information and actually start a dialogue with the people that are submitting. They have an office space.
Collecting something instead of just reading something, which Saul, I'm bringing back to you because then it goes back to data bias. How do you prevent data bias, if any regulation at all, in all of this? I mean, the data, I'll give it an example. I know how busy the Shell station is behind me because of anonymous cell phone traffic. I know it's one of the top 5 in the country. I wish more of them would shop here at the cafe that we own. but not yet. And then the car wash we're going to build, because you keep talking about your car wash, and we're going to put one over there. What is being done, if anything, on that side?
You get back to, it's not enough data. So if you're being fooled, it's just not enough data, because we got the machine learning and AI, and we can figure out the percentage of those clicks that are not based on, right? I mean, you just need more data, you need more computing power, you need more data scientists. But getting back to what you say, absolutely, it's the truth. If you have the data, you can figure a lot of this out. Now, is it perfect? No, but can you improve and make it more efficient? Absolutely.
So that would be back to intuition. Intuition based on insight, based on greater data.
Well, right now it's intuition. It's like, I think these are clients coming in, but if we look at it enough, then the insight comes from the crunching of the data. And so while human intuition, I don't want to say it's not important. Human intuition is always going to have a play. That's what people like to hear, right? It'll always have a part, but it can be done with more knowledge, and that'll make, where they smart decision making, right? Using the data to help you make smarter decisions. Well, and that's happening everywhere and everything, isn't it?
Yes. Well, hopefully. Yeah. I do remember a time when my GPS used to say make a U-turn. Then it became make a U-turn when legal. So there's a very important distinction there. But
it learns.
Yeah. Well, we get smarter.
It learns.
But when we talk about humans getting smarter and doing things, I think to this day the most heavily reliant human element today is construction and engineering. I mean, there's some cool stuff. There's some incredible stuff with goggles that will tell me how old the HVAC is, whether or not, who knows that it's COVID safe. I'm sure Google Glass has one. What about you, Chris? I know the cost went down a bit on timber, but as we're talking about all this data, are you seeing more about these data decisions? Are the actual GCs and architects taking into account these things?
I'm definitely starting to see more of the GCs and the CMs especially. But the other thing I'm starting to see is some of the individuals who are putting themselves in spots where they're representing owners. That's where I'm starting to see them really bringing the data, bringing all the information to the table to the actual owner, so the owner can go back to the GC or the CM or whatever the case is to really kind of make those better informed decisions. So I see some of the consultants that are, being the owner's representation on some of the bigger buildings that are being put up. Chances are they're developers, they're real estate agents, but they have that little piece, that person who can kind of be in between the construction side and the actual development real estate side. They're finding that data, if they could bring that data out there, if they could bring it to the right person, to the right GCs, the right CMs, they can make better decisions as to who they're going to get to build these actual, projects and to build these actual buildings and to build them the right way. And the perfect pairing is when you have those owner representatives working with some of these GCs and CMs, and they're all on the same page and saying, hey, listen, we're not going to just go off of, nothing in construction. You're not just going to go off of intuition alone anyway, but they're on the same page and they're saying, all right, well, we're going to look through all the numbers. We're going to look through everything we need to look through, and we're going to make sure that these buildings are going up correctly and making sure that we are making these things as efficient as possible. I see it with some of the, there's a big net zero hotel that's being put up in New Haven. They're renovating an old building, and their whole goal is to make sure that they're using renewable energy and that they are making things as efficient as possible and making sure their decisions right down the line from the top to the bottom are right where they need to be. So starting to see it more. I will admittedly let you know, the people I'm dealing with, they are so busy that I'm limited into the conversations and the amount of conversation I can have with them, which is a good thing because they are busy and they are out there. But I'm starting to hear a lot more, in regards to, using a lot of AI and using a lot more information-based, information that they're using to make their decisions, and making sure. I see a lot more companies relying on their engineers in different ways.
Sure.
And yeah, staring at them right off the bat. Where are we going with this? What's the plan? What are you seeing issues with? And there's some issues going on in the country and in the world where, they want to make sure these things are built to last, and make sure that they're doing things the right way, so they're not catching something, down the road, whether it be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years down the road, that they should have paid attention to, based off of the information that was available to them the whole time.
That brings up a good point, and thoughts and prayers with everything going on in Florida and in other disaster areas, wherever and whichever you want to refer to. Information being available, back to Saul again, readily available and not necessarily acted upon, which brings us almost back to regulation and oversight somewhat. What's too much data? Are we getting to too much? The biggest problem I face with our users at CRECo in general, and I can say it in a statement, is data overload. So Saul, you mentioned data scientists a few times, and I see ads all day long about data science degrees. We should all have a few data scientists in our office all the time. I guess, in everything, even in the car wash, I'm guessing.
Yeah, we can tell you which bay is the most productive. At what time of day?
Yeah, that's pretty. It's amazing what insights you have using this data, collecting this data.
So let's go to your point though, Andreas, and that is there too much data? Well, we're not talking about for the human mind to absorb.
Right.
It's not like the human mind has to absorb all this data. It's like we have machines that absorb this data and now can crunch and with algorithms, lots to this, and it's not about. As a matter of fact, the more data that we give to our computers, the more refined the answer is that comes out. And so it's more data that needs to be fed into it, not less data. But it's not like I've got so much data. Well, I do, right? So I just don't turn off the television or turn whatever, right? That's information overload.
Right.
Not data, and there might be information overload, but not data overload, because we shouldn't be dealing with the raw data as human beings. We have machines to do that.
Well, garbage in and garbage out, as the saying goes.
Well, so I'm not saying that the data you put in is garbage. It should be garbage, but you should. So as you start to think about data, you start to think about components or data components you never thought about before. That if you started collecting them, goes into a bigger picture of what you as an individual are looking at. If you're trying to create something or build something or measure something, and the more you if the data you get is false, then that's no good. Right. But you know what? After a while, if we really had some good people working for us, we'd be able to figure out the percentage of false data we receive, and we'd be able to even make that a little better. So it's about putting as much in. That takes computing power, right? Putting as much in to get as refined a resource. So it's, they used to call it smart growth. And it's really about using data to make more informed decisions. And people aren't used to doing it openly, and people are getting more used to it. As a matter of fact, like Yelp, you go somebody says something, you go get data, right? You go and look and see where you think data might, so you can make a smart decision. Right. And it can be used now, at the most finite level. So it's amazing to me.
Sure. Yelp. I've been on Yelp 3 times this week, but yes, Yelp's a great example. I like the extensions for the best deal. Find me the best deal. Find me the best materials, so on and so forth.
So think about Yelp for a minute. Is 1,000 reviews better than 100? Maybe, unless 999 of them are machine generated. Right. And that's, Rebecca, that's what you were talking about, right? So you have to be able to kind of figure that out. A great book is The Hype Machine by Sinan Aral, and kind of give you a perspective about what can kind of go on out there with data. So yeah, there's a negative side to it, but not one that can't be overcome. It's always weighing the good against the bad, right? It's the Ben Franklin close, we used to call it. I don't know if they call it that anymore, right? We weigh the good against the bad and figure out which way we want to go.
Well, I like the Wikipedia, the story of Wikipedia and growth, and how it was able to overcome bias and not self-educate, but through the crowds and through all of this sharing of data, things got better and better. So back on the marketing side, in marketing, with all your peers, with the regulation changes already happening in data, because all the regulations we're talking about are coming, real estate wise, potentially. Right now, we're having these regulation discussions, changes. How are we tracked? What is tracked? What is shared? What do you see as the best way forward there? And it's not an easy question, I know. To getting your data, we checklist it. We did it before, but what do we do now? Because we're coming up on that magic time where we start to tell our people what they should be doing or hope they should be doing to do better.
Well, we did talk last month about making sure that we had it all, and so that we could catalog it and know what we have even before we make those decisions. And I really wish that Professor Hayes was here, because obviously he is the best cybersecurity expert and he's so knowledgeable on this particular topic, and we're going to have to do a follow-up with him next time to get his insight on what to do with data. I really liked what Saul said about information overload versus data overload.
Sure.
That was incredibly insightful. Privacy regulations are a part of that tension between what's good for the individual and what's good for the group, between individual rights and company rights, between whether when you buy your phone, you're also giving all of your data to everybody who your phone provider wants to have that data. I mean, the iPhone restrictions for privacy are a perfect example of that. Like even yesterday, I saw, one of my friends from childhood posting on Facebook, just another reason why you should be an iPhone user, because they protect data. They protect data differently than Android protects data. So there are so many decisions that we can make. And I do think the first thing you want to do is get a little bit educated on the topic. So there are so many articles, and I mean, Andreas, when you're reading articles, and Andreas sends them to me via Skype pretty regularly. But yesterday, people using AI to talk to dead people, like there all sorts of crazy things that people are using data to do that may cross ethical or personal or moral kind of areas for different people. And novelty, where does novelty and innovation coincide with ethics? And I think those are some constant conversations that are being held right now. Do you know how amazing that is? We're having the conversations. We're not ignoring them. People are actually talking about privacy. People are actually talking about what matters in your data. They're talking about how that correlates with ethics. They're talking about education and making sure the next generation is equipped with knowledge, and will get selected to go to college because they don't have a bunch of naked pictures of themselves on their Facebook pages. So there's all sorts of, or aren't saying racist things or horrible things to other human beings. There's more and more often a conversation around it. And Saul's been leading that conversation for decades, but now we're starting to see other people taking that charge and owning it. And I think just like Saul talked about how many decades it took to revitalize an area, I think that's no different than what we've seen in technology. It's taking decades to revitalize the area. We're human beings. We don't move that fast as a society and as a culture. We got to get comfortable with it and kind of understand it a little bit, and maybe like it a little bit. Maybe I could go there for dinner. Maybe we should all move there because it's the coolest neighborhood in town. Right? There's a progression, and I bet if we crunched some data, we would see some very consistent, and it could be chaos theory or whatever, but some consistent ways that human adoption and adaptation work together. I don't know if that answered your question at all, but it's fascinating.
No, Rick, you're right on it. So if people want a takeaway, if they want to study privacy themselves, then the initials that come to mind immediately are CCPA and GDPR, right? So if you really want a California Consumer Protection, and then it's the European one. So there are major bodies and laws around this, and it'll evolve to the rest of the country, maybe not the rest of the world, but the rest of the country. But it takes time. And but you're seeing progress now. So I always say that things happen. Change is always taking place. It's always bubbling along. It's just not enough for something to manifest that's visible to people. And so when it manifests, people go, "Wow, that changed overnight." No, it didn't change overnight. It's been like changing. Just enough happened so where you recognized the change.
I think a great broker example, and anyone who ever bought or sold a house in the last 5 years, is I'm sure you're all getting constant contact emails. It was as if that company sprung up overnight. They're just an email marketing company, not a small company, but all of a sudden it was there. But for many of us, we've been seeing it for a long time, and everyone had it. So yeah, Rebecca, you did answer my question. So you helped fine tune the answer for me, so I appreciate that. And then, like everything else, getting comfortable, I think, is right. And Chris, on your side, the construction side, the developers, are they getting more comfortable with tech and transparency at all? I'm seeing a more technology on how to build things, not just Olivia's platform. There's incredible tech coming out of Australia where they can model it, build it, and 3D print it. But we're not going to talk about that right now.
The whole other conversation. Yeah, I mean, I definitely have seen the majority of the contractors. You know, they're whether they have to get dragged into it or not by some of the younger employees coming in, or some of the engineers coming in and saying, this is great, you have to see this technology, you have to see how we're doing things. I'm actually getting it seems like calls every couple of weeks asking about something that is technology based. It may not be that, hey, can you help provide this? But hey, do you know a company that does this? Do you know someone that does this? And it's funny because some of them are companies that have been around with the association I work for 30 and 40 years, and they're saying, hey, why don't you call over there and find out if you have anybody who deals in it might be solar procurement, it might be there's a device that's utilized, it's a safety device to kind of track the laborers and track the workers on the job site as to where they are and what they're doing. And it's more or less, it's like a clip. It's basically a belt clip. And your first thought on that is, they're trying to track their workers, just like they're trying to track mileage and track this and track that. It's really so they can collect data for safety purposes down the road and make sure that what they're doing is safer 5 years from now than it was 5 years ago or than it was today. It's not necessarily to know where someone is at any given moment just to track whether they're working or not. You know that they're working. It's just a matter of, we want to know where they are, what they're doing. There's all sorts of different stuff going on.
But it could be tracking those other things too. How long does it take them to get to the first floor to the third floor?
Oh yeah. I guarantee that they're looking at some of that stuff as well. But it's interesting. One of the main things, and this is probably on the takeaway side of things, and Saul mentioned before about, it's not the data that you have to have it all in your head as a human being. You rely on the machines. That's part of what I've seen with some of the contractors, especially the smaller ones, the subcontractors, where it's like, listen, all you have to do is you got to collect the data, you got to run it through its sources, and then you're going to find out things that you never knew existed or that you never knew before. They need to get off the fact that, well, what do I do with this? Well, it's not you that needs to remember all of it, to Saul's point. It's all going to go through a machine. It's all going to go through computers. The more you have, the better. Don't be afraid of having too much or collecting, and don't be afraid because it's something you haven't dealt with ever before. It's here. It's not going anywhere. it's going up and up and up, and it's not a change that has happened overnight. And so you're starting to see those, those conversations like Becca mentioned, those conversations on topics and about data that normally were like kind of blurred lines, and someone would say, oh, that's not really where I want to go with this conversation. And instead you're starting to get some of those owners saying, you know what, I gotta take this. If I'm going to pass this off to my son or daughter, if I'm going to pass this off to the next generation, I better get on board, or I'm gonna.
The eyes aren't glazing over; they're leaning in, as Saul is. Or do we all feed it into the data advocate, Saul?
Yeah, the data advocate. No, but let me talk. This is a very practical application of collecting the data. See, the people that don't want you to collect the data, nobody's explained to them the benefits of that.
Exactly.
But if you collected the data and they could make a safer work site, then maybe the insurance rates would go down, and maybe the people involved could actually get some kind of credit through a tracking system, so that by letting this happen, their life gets, as a matter of fact, then if they're working on job sites, maybe their health insurance is lower, and so more data is better. But nobody puts it in like a practical application where we can see how the results benefit, because we haven't thought. That's why I say every time I get into it, I think I have to push one level up, right? And I finally got to the point where we're addressing the biggest problems facing humanity today, and we now have the tools to deal with it. And let's build from there, and then we can talk about anything we want, right? And it all comes back to data.
So I'm so glad you mentioned that. Just kind of light bulb went off in my head, and this ties into the marketing side. This particular device, and I'll get an article on it. One of the first places I saw it marketed was not the company marketing that created the device. It was an insurance company. It was an insurance company that was marketing the device as, hey, this is a contractor essential, for lack of a better term. And it didn't really occur to me at the time, but that's why they were marketing that device, because they knew they could bring on more contractors and bring on more customers, because it has that safety feature that is going to allow them to collect more information and say, you know what, you're X% safer than, every other contractor out there. So therefore your rates will go
down. And think about that worker. Nobody's ever explained the benefit to them. So now if they can be compensated more for the amount of data that they collect, this might become a whole new paradigm of on the job. And part of it is making the job better, and they get rewarded for it because we got machines that can handle all of that.
Absolutely.
And so it's endless, really, when you start to look at making more efficient decisions, because we've now got, or we're moving every day, more and more. Remember 2001, A Space Odyssey? Hal is here, right?
So wait
Hal.
a second. So what you're saying is that the breakdown is in the human element, which is communication. The human element in all of this process is what broke down, because it's not being communicated properly to the other people involved to make sure that they have a real understanding of the benefits.
Now, if it doesn't benefit them, they can make that decision. I don't want that. Right. That's the whole idea. Right. So some people it will benefit, some people it won't, but people don't get the big story. And I go back to this because it's like become real apparent to me in the last month that I have to keep going higher and higher, because to explain to people what's happening, we have to cover more things so they don't get the whole picture. Say text without context is pretext. And so if we give people this small little piece, they don't get all of this, right?
It's very few times in my life have I walked into a room to present something and had someone say, no, I don't want more business. So if you can educate them and help them understand, then it will help their business, and communicate it effectively through marketing, but execute it effectively through building. And not glorify it, but evangelize it the way you do, Saul. I think we're there. And that's why I love this call, among many other reasons. So as we're hitting the top of the hour, and I want to congratulate first Chris for being promoted to a new board just last month.
Thank you very much.
On another board locally, so congrats. And Saul, I wasn't joking about my data advocate plug there. What is the data advocate that we keep touching on briefly?
Well, so many years ago, when I was gathering data from MLSs and syndicating it to Zillow and Trulia and the rest, I realized there weren't any data rules. And so I began to create data contracts and data rules with the help of John Riley and a couple of big law firms in the real estate industry. And so, but people had to speak out for the data, because every time I would say on the Inman platform, I got for 15 years, I was like in front of everybody, and I would say, this data is valuable. The consumer data is valuable. And then of course, all the people that are collecting the data and aren't paying for it, they would say, oh no, that data is not valuable. Oh no, nobody's going to pay for that data. You're crazy, Saul. We're going to give them this advertising benefit. And all the data we collect, that pay is free to, right? So there was this conversation. And so John Riley and I bought the domain, The Data Advocate. And so I was very outspoken, just like I was when the internet popped out. The name of our company was Internet Crusade. And we were the Internet Crusade. And we went out, we taught people how to use email. And so, because they had to jump that shark, right?
Yes.
The same thing with data today, but you can't do it just telling people part of the story. Somebody's got to be an advocate. Somebody's got to put a stake in the ground and say, look, I don't care what you think. I don't care. I'm telling you, this is the direction it's going. You can if you look at it, you can figure out whether it's good for you or not. It's going to help you decide whether it's good for you or not.
Yeah. And of course, getting that message across in a succinct way. Becca at Carlson Integrated, and I believe you just brought on a new management person that was interacting with me and promoting this show as well as others. How about you? Where is this month going? What can they do? We're at the top of the hour.
So I think that I can close our conversation out from my perspective today with a preview of what I want to talk about next time, which is, why does Instagram now want to be all videos? So you all can have a month to think about how you're going to answer me, how we can start some sort of business to do videos for people like me who hate video. So I think there's a whole new niche. I think there's a whole new niche of people that like me who are going to have to learn how to play ball in that world. So that's what I want to talk about next time. Circling back, I think that this conversation today has had so many really important and really salient points. But I think that Saul's comment that information overload and data overload are not the same thing is the most important, because it totally reframes how we look at data. And Chris's example was perfect, because that data is fed into a company that provides that insight and that reporting. You don't have to know it all. You don't have to think through it all. It doesn't all have to go through your brain for processing. And that's one of the amazing pieces of data, and why data is so important, and why it's so useful, and why, like CRECo, right? It's a tool. You always talk about it as a tool, and how you use it in your business to grow your business is the most important piece, and the why.
It's, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking back to leadership books and other things I've read, some of which, Saul, candidly, you've suggested, but delegating tasks, responsibility, authority, and part of this educational curve, to jump in ahead of Chris, and his part was, to everyone's point, is getting people educated enough to understand, even myself, that the machine will take over. I don't need to know it all, and that's what it's there for, if we can train it and teach it. But Chris, top of the hour, what's your thought for the month based on the call? Where are we going?
I'm going to keep it pretty simple, and just, as far as on the construction side, if the contractors that, haven't really embraced it, just don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of data. Just don't be afraid of it. Know that the more that there is, the more that you can actually work with, and just it's not something that is going to just go away, no matter how much some of these companies that I surround myself with would like it. I'm not saying they would like it to go away, but just kind of ignore it. You can't just put it under a rug. You might as well put it to use,
right?
Because that's how you're going to be able to build better. that's how you're going to be able to market better. That's the way you're going to be able to. And when I say build better, I'm not necessarily talking about the actual building. I'm talking about building the business. Andreas, when you said you never went to a place where someone said, I don't want to see
Once or twice, but that's because I didn't educate them well.
But it's usually has to do with, I've also heard that I'm right where I need to be as far as their scalability and how far I'm right where, and I'm like, well, there's got to be something else that you can do while working on your business instead of on. I mean, that's going to be able to make that grow that much further. So my only thing is just not to be afraid of it and just kind of, embrace it for what it's worth, because it is worth something. It's worth a lot. It's worth more than some of us will ever know.
And if it's not worth something to us as realtors giving away all that information for how many years now, Saul? It is worth something to somebody. Look at the price they paid for showing desk, but we won't even go into that on this call.
So here I would add one thing, Andreas, and that is that look at data as raw material. It's just raw material. And the more raw material you have, the more options you have. And then there's this other piece, and that is there's a period of time between the discovery of something and then when everybody knows about it. So something gets discovered, and then a period of time goes by and everybody knows about it. Now that period of time is referred to as lag. The period of time from when something's discovered and everybody knows about it. And so opportunity generally resides more abundantly close to the discovery as opposed to close to mass awareness. And so that even though it sounds like everybody knows right now, that we're still in the opening stages of the effective utilization of data and everything that means. And so it's not too late. It's very early yet.
It's actually perfect timing for those of us listening and talking to grow, build our businesses. And as I used to say that Instagram was for people that couldn't read, Twitter was for people that couldn't write. But hey, look at the data, look at all the business. And I'm on both now, so are my businesses. Because you had to be there at the right time to get the most out of it. And now even more is happening in different places. And people would laugh. I had the original iPad. I should have framed it, growing out of my arm, taking business from my betters, because I could display it, I could talk, and I could show. And the CBRE report was this big. My report was this big, but it had this much info. To your point, if you have it and you're there, you're going, and you can go more places much further. Guys, welcome. Thank you again for another great show. I could talk all night on this stuff, especially with this group. How do we reach everyone? Saul, we'll go around. How do people get to you? Do they now go to the Data Advocate?
Well, we're getting ready to open it up. All you'll find there is like a cover page right now. So they can go to the dataadvocate.com, or they can send me an email at saul@bettercallsaul.realtor.
And Becca, how do they find you for marketing and all things?
So drop me an email, Becca@carlsonintegrated.com. And Becca is BEKAH, by the way.
Chris?
Same thing, email, able@ctabc.org. It's ABEL @ctabc.org. I love getting email and be happy to chat with people.
And for those of you who don't know who I am, you can find me on CRECo.ai, social media, or by email as well, Andreas, ANDREAS, @CRECo, CRECO.ai, or more importantly, subscribe, like, review, and come see us again here at the Roundtable. Saul, Chris, Becca, and Mr. Mendoza, our production expert. Thank you all for joining. Stay safe if you're in any of these stormy areas. I'm looking forward to talking again soon.